Councilman?
Hey, how you doing?
Good, good, good.
Well, I believe we're all here finally.
Not mentioning any names or anything.
Yeah.
He was on the construction.
Call a special meeting to order, this being Tuesday, March the 7th, 2023, is a work session. First item will be approval of the agenda, and I'm sure everybody got one. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Next item will be the consent agenda. Sherry?
Nothing on consent, Mr. Mayor.
No consent?
No, sir.
Okay, moving on to new business. Back to you, Sherry. First item, presentation and discussion regarding the FY24 budget matters.
Okay. Well, welcome. This is our first discussion regarding and sort of our kickoff for the 2024 budget for the town of Woodfin. So I'm excited to dig into this with you all. Today will be more of a listening session. We'll provide you with a lot of information regarding forecasts and fund balance and debt service and things that we kind of need to know the broad strokes of as you enter into more detailed budget discussions in the next two work sessions. And hopefully the information we provide today will help you with some of the decisions you'll be asked to make. We're going to start with a budget process overview. We'll spend a good bit of time today on the 5-year financial forecast, and I'll talk in a minute about why that's important. We had some questions at our retreat about fund balance, so we're going to briefly review our fund balance policy, where the fund balance sits today, and look at some projections moving forward. I attempted a 5-year projection of fund balance, which is a little trickier because of the things that apply to restricted fund balance, but I put some numbers together that I think are pretty accurate and for you all to review. And then finally, Shannon will conclude the meeting talking about our new community grant program that was introduced last fall and where we hope to go with that as we move forward. And there'll be a resolution for you to consider as a part of that discussion. So the FY24 budget, all the things that we discuss in the next work sessions and a lot of the work that staff does behind the scenes make up what will finally be the budget that'll be presented for you to consider in May. We'll start together the bottom arrows with a 5-year financial forecast. We'll look back and forward with that. And then the April work session, we'll talk mainly about capital projects. I'll have a 5-year capital improvement plan for you to review. And we're going to talk about our major programs and capital projects, the Blue Way Greenway. Adrian will be providing an update on that, as well as the street capital improvement project, where we are with all the street work we did last year and what we hope to accomplish moving forward, and the new stormwater mandate, the town's proposal and plans for moving those costs to a stormwater fund. You all approved a stormwater ordinance in the last board meeting, and this will build on that. And so we'll talk about the details of those capital items in April. In May, we'll move on to expansion requests, things that are not currently either new employees, new programs, and any other expansion items that are not part of our current operating base budget. And we'll also talk about our fee schedule, an update on park operations as we plan for the new parks to come online in the next few years, what we foresee as far as staffing needs and additional operating costs to support that. And then finally, May 16th at your regular board meeting, we'll present you with the proposed operating budget for fiscal year 24. So that's sort of our whole process in a nutshell. You were provided with this calendar a couple of times that shows you all the pertinent dates and the times. The next budget work session, actually the next two in April and May, will be midday. We'll provide you with lunch, and those will be longer work sessions. So we'll be providing more information and hopefully more discussion and feedback will be welcome from the board. Any questions about the schedule or where we're headed? Okay. So the 5-year financial forecast. A financial forecast is, and I'm going to go ahead and add these bullets. That's cool the way you do that, but it's easier to talk about it this way. We discuss a 5-year forecast for the purpose of evaluating current and future operations. We provide the numbers at a base budget level, so there's no additional capital, no added programs or anything. It's simply evaluating our base revenue and expenditures so that the board can use that information to be better informed to make decisions as we move forward. When we evaluate revenues and expenditures, you'll see what we have left to work with in providing for new programs or new requirements of government mandates or the capital projects or the things that we have to be fiscally responsible in funding. We'll provide you with the assumptions that were used. In financial forecasting, it's required to use a really conservative approach so that we don't overshoot our revenues or expenditures, and we want to really be able to meet the numbers that we project in these things. And we'll go over what those assumptions are and how the numbers were put together. And we'll also talk about when operational changes with primarily the Blueway Greenway and stormwater will be required and how that'll affect our budget as we move forward. This is a snapshot of the whole thing, and I wanted to show you this first so you can kind of see where we are, but I'd like to go through a few slides and tell you where these numbers came from. And there's some highlights that we'll talk about, and then we'll go back to this slide at the end of the forecast discussion and talk about it in more detail. So revenues, our main revenue sources are taxes, property taxes, sales and use tax and utility tax. Those things are the key revenues that support Woodfin's operations. In reviewing property taxes, I added 3% year over year as we move forward to account for growth and changes in evaluations, except for fiscal year 25. That's the county's next revaluation year. So in 25, I added a 10% increase in our property tax base and calculated the taxes in the forecast based on that. If you look at our history, these are fairly conservative numbers that I feel like we'll certainly meet, but the economy is very uncertain at the moment with inflation as high as it is and a number of things that are going on, not only nationally but internationally, that could affect Woodfin's budget at the end of the day. So,
Can I ask a naive question? Do you pick the 10%? Because historically, that's been a good plumb line.
in an evaluation year, that's sort of a rule of thumb, is you think.
Everybody uses that more or less.
Historically, I looked at the last revaluation and took what it went up and then looked at the last few years, and 10% seemed like the right number
Okay,
for
thanks.
2025.
Just curious.
And we also, the impact of development, we had an awful lot of development in the last 10 years in Woodfin. That seems to have slowed some, although we have some major projects that will come online in the next 5 years. So we factor that in, but I didn't weigh that as heavily as history has over the last 5 years because, we have our new ordinances in place and there's some more smart development that will go on, but I don't think it'll be to the level that we saw in the last 5 to 10 years in Woodfin. So 3% and then 10% in 25 was what I increased our tax revenue by in the forecast. Sales and use tax, we experienced unprecedented growth in that over the last 2 years primarily. 21 over fiscal year 20, we saw 32% growth in sales tax revenue, and then last year, 26%. I used 5% moving forward because although Woodfin continues to grow, our population has increased. Tourism in Buncombe County is a good thing for sales tax revenue. The economy being what it is, and the feds continue to increase interest rates to try to control inflation, and there's a lot of uncertainty in the folks that project these numbers as to where sales tax is going to end up. So I used 5%. That's still, you would normally use about 3%. But given the history in the last few years and looking at the economy, I thought 5% was a little more aggressive, but still a safe number in reviewing our projections. Hopefully, we'll see 10%, 15%, but for just discussion purposes, I included 5. Rental income, the community center plans are uncertain depending on the feasibility study we'll have underway shortly regarding our town hall expansion. We have returned to pre-COVID levels of renting the park, shelters and things. Silverline Park is online, and then we'll have the new parks in 2025 or 26 that will have some shelter rental from that. So we took those numbers into account. And then other revenue like Powell bill, I left that the same as last year, and some of the other minor revenue sources, I just took a 4-year average, and that's what is included as far as revenues. The next several slides will review some of the major sources of funds for the town. As you can see, property taxes, the dark blue on the left side, is our major, by far, source of funds for the town. Sales tax is the second place, and then utility tax, Powell bill, and permit fees are other less significant sources of revenue for the town. But historically, that's all trended up, and you can kind of see the relation one to the other. Sales tax especially, this is property tax. I showed at the bottom in red the tax assessed, the rate that Woodfin has had for the last 6 years. Last 4 years, it's been 33 cents per $100 of assessed value, and before that, it was 28 cents. We raised from 28 to 33 to support the Blueway Greenway project as a result of the referendum that Woodfin had, and since then, it's been stable at 33 cents. You'll see our assessed value with the last valuation jumped from $946,000 up to $1.1 billion in Woodfin, and so we think that will continue to increase somewhat, but not at the rate that it did before. Any questions from anyone so far? Our assessed value, I was just doing some of the percentages, has increased 39% in the last 5 years, so that's a pretty significant amount of growth. As compared to some of the other jurisdictions in Buncombe County, we are at 33 cents, Black Mountain's at 31, Biltmore Forest is 35, as is Weaverville, Asheville's at 40 cents, and Montreat's at 43. Our citizens pay a combined tax. They also pay the Buncombe County tax, and most folks pay a fire district, and some pay school district taxes, in addition to what Woodfin charges in the way of taxes. Currently, at today's assessment, the most recent one I got in January, every penny that we raise taxes would generate about $116,000 in revenue for the town. And that's at a 99.5% collection rate. Buncombe County they collect our taxes for us and remit the money to us monthly, and they do a phenomenal job in tax collections. Their collection percentage is very high. Sales tax, you can see that the orange is this year. It's kind of been more linear than most years. We usually see a dip in April, May, and then it goes back up in summer months when folks are traveling, and so when we receive the June, July, and August revenue. But we started out a good bit ahead of where we started last year, and it's continued to come in at roughly the same rate. So so far this year, it's been very strong. And then we'll talk about expenditures. A number of assumptions we made related to expenditures. Salary and benefits, because we're a service agency, our largest expense, operating-wise, is to cover employee costs, salary and benefits. I figured 3% annually after this next fiscal year, and I'll have another slide in a minute to show you why that is. Insurance, health and benefits, the broker that we use advised that about a 10% increase would be reasonable for this year, so that's what we factored in. And then we've already received about a percentage increase in retirement costs from the state for next year. After that, I factored in 0.75% in the assumptions used to generate this forecast. Vehicles, we began the police department lease program about 3 years ago, and in 2024 they will have, if we get the ones that are on order for this year, 14 leased vehicles. So that is part of the information that is in the projections. Patrol cars after the 5-year lease can be purchased at salvage value, $3,000 or $4,000. If they're still in good shape and it makes sense to do that, we may do it for years after that. I included a 5% annual increase in maintenance and repair costs for public works lines, because looking back at the history, that was about what we had experienced year over year. Town services, street maintenance in the projections was capped at our Powell bill revenue amount for each year. So didn't put any additional street maintenance. If we make a recommendation to do that spending, it would come out of whatever excess we have over the base budget. 5-year annual increase in landfill and tipping costs. The garbage dumping fees have gone down about 18% since we began with the new carts. We received notice from the county that dump fees are going to go up, so that'll offset that sum. And I kind of split the difference and added a 10% increase over the current, the average for the last 3 months after we initiated the trash cart program for the projections and in the budget for next year. Recycling has gone up 18% the other way. In the contract for this year, they're charging us a few cents more per customer monthly because of the volume of recycling. Instead of the little bins that we had before, we have the big 95-gallon carts. And then their contract allows for a CPI increase of 7% at the end of this contract, which expires in November. After that, I added a 5% annual increase for CPI. Debt service, which we will go over in detail at the end of this presentation, is included in the projections. So all the debt service on anything that we have issued to date, which includes the Reynolds Village TIF tax increment financing agreement that we have with the county. That is our financing on the public works and sanitation trucks, the street improvement capital debt service that we issued last year, and the parks general obligation bonds. And I'll go through, I have a slide that shows each of those amortization schedules and where we are with the debt service on all of our obligations. And then finally, the remaining assumptions for expenditures, I added 10% for liability and property insurance increases year over year. The community grant assistance program is factored in at the current level. Stormwater management plans, so we anticipate moving our stormwater costs to a separate fund, which will be supported by a stormwater fee. So in these projections, I removed that beginning in fiscal year 2024 from the general fund budget, and it will be in a standalone fund of its own. And fuel cost, increasing 5% year in the next year, and then 3% after that for most other costs. A few slides just talking about some additional detail on the expenditure side of the forecast. Personnel costs, as I said, are one of our largest expenses. Our policy says that the town board can provide a cost of living adjustment each year up to the consumer price index for urban wage and clerical workers. That's the index that the Social Security Administration uses and federal government and most state agencies. That is measured December to December of each year. That amount for 2021 to 2022 was 8.46%. We gave a 6% increase last year, and it's calling for an 8.5% this year. I know that that's probably not feasible in our budget, but that's what the number is. The projections moving forward, if you read some of the economic forecasts, are quite complicated this year because of inflation and cost of living and interest rates and various other factors that we haven't really dealt with in the last few years. And bottom line is, a lot of the analytical sources are saying that inflation, although it's been high for the last year, they're projecting it's trending down, they think, for this year, and they project a 3.5% to 4% increase for 2023 as opposed to the 8.5% that we saw in 2022. So maybe we're kind of at the end of this super inflation, and it's going to stabilize some. That's the hopes of everyone. But the middle part of the slide, I gave you some examples. If we provide employees, and this factors in all the benefits that are tied to salary, if we provide a 1, 3, 5, or 6, 7, and all the way up to the 8.25%, what that amounts to in dollars for additional cost for the town at our current staffing level. So it's significant dollars, but that is the most, our largest expense. I assumed in the projections 6% in 2024 and 3% in subsequent years. Gas prices are something else that affect multiple items in our budget. AAA says that the national, or that this is the Asheville average, was last week $3.19, and it's probably about right, for regular gas and $4.49 for diesel. They're projecting that nationally gas prices for the remaining part of this year should stabilize around $3.30 to $3.40. They're not projecting we'll see the $4 a gallon prices that we experienced last summer. So hopefully it'll pan out that way and maybe even trend down. But that's what they're saying on gas prices as of March 1st. So all those assumptions taking into consideration is where we get these numbers from. The light blue numbers on for 19, 20, 21, and 22 were actual numbers. That's where we ended up at the end of our fiscal year each year, and those are the numbers that'll match your audit reports. And then our amended budget for 2023 is in the last light blue column, and my projections for this fiscal year are in the first darker blue column for 2023. We budgeted $1,558,000 out of fund balance for some of the one-time projects like the trash carts and a few other things, using what the results of basically our ARPA funds from COVID relief for that. We're going to end up in a much better position and only need to use $217,000 of that money if nothing unforeseen happens for the rest of the fiscal year, and we end up where we think we will be in the appropriated budget. So that's a good thing. We had some savings and some additional revenue in taxes, and sales tax primarily was accounted for almost $500,000 of that savings. So we were able to take that general fund contribution and knock it down to about $217,000. That's where we think we'll be at the end of this year. After that, without any new items, the projections show that we'll have $444,000 to the good next year, and then that increases slightly in subsequent years. That does include moving stormwater, as I mentioned before, to its own fund, and it does not include additional capital projects that we are not already committed to. Any questions so far about that? Okay. So, fund balance, how does fund balance tie into these projections, and why is that? Why do we care what fund balance is?
Can I,
Yes, sir.
I may,
Go back.
I don't know how far you're gonna go on the community programs on the slide before. I noticed that we've never done that before. It's $88,500. What is that for?
That was the community programs, the homeowners grant, the money for ABCCM, and the Riverlink school education program, and Catholic Charities that you all appropriated last, I think, October, November, for those. It's taken the place of our previous Christmas fund, and
Right. I knew the Christmas fund was around 24,000 every year, and I saw that 88,500.
yeah, you all appropriated last fall additional money we used what was left in the Christmas fund, and then appropriated additional money to support those programs, and with the promise that we would come back as part of this budget season with a annual program where people can apply, nonprofits in the community that support the things that you all feel support the folks in need in this community, and put applications in, and then you would evaluate what, if anything, you wanted to fund moving forward. At the end of this presentation, we were actually going to talk about that in detail and look at where we started, what we funded this year, and where we hope to go with the program as we move forward. So I think we'll answer your questions when we get to that part, Commissioner. Any other questions? Okay, fund balance. In May of '21, we passed a formal fund balance policy. The town had not had a policy before that, and I think Shannon shared that with the board a few weeks ago. But where we, and I took a few of the slides from that presentation, we did a lot of research to determine what the appropriate policy would be for a town the size of Woodfin. And generally, you look at your peers, other municipalities in the state that are around our size and level of operations. We looked at all the state and local requirements for fund balance, and we looked at our operations and our budget needs. And what you want to have a healthy fund balance for is to provide for contingencies, unforeseen things that just come up that you wouldn't have known to budget for. It provides credit worthiness so that when we go to borrow money, if we have a responsible amount of money in the bank, they'll be more apt to lend us money at a good rate. So you want to maintain a healthy fund balance for that reason. Financing cost avoidance, so we don't want to have to borrow money for every single project that the board would like to fund. Investment income, so if we have a little bit of a nest egg in the bank, not a few years ago when interest rates were almost zero, but now we're earning a decent amount of interest on the money that we have set aside in the bank. To provide cash flow, our income is not our expenses are pretty linear throughout the year, but our income is not. We get most of our tax revenue December, January, February, and that has to fund operations for the remaining part of the year. So you have to have a little bit of a cash in the bank to avoid cash flow issues as you go throughout the summer months primarily. And then the policy provides guidance and clarity. We want to do things in a purposeful manner so that we're being responsible with the taxpayers' dollars and reviewing that like we should. So the policy that we have, I think, makes all those accommodations. We set a 30% minimum. That sounds high compared to some of the large municipalities like Buncombe County, but for the town of Woodfin, 30% is really not that much actual cash. We target 50% is where we think is a healthy place to stay, and then a 70% cap, which once we get close to 70%, the board should look at either paying off debt, funding capital projects that are needed to support the town and new programs and services that might be necessary. So that in reviewing a fund balance policy, you would want to look at those kinds of things. In reviewing our neighbors, Weaverville's fund balance policy sets a minimum of 20% with 40% as the target, so somewhat similar to ours, but a little less. Black Mountain has a 30% minimum, and their policy isn't specific as far as a target or a maximum. Biltmore's is different, and it only states that there's they target an unrestricted fund balance of 25 to 35% of general fund expenditures. And then Buncombe County's, of course, is 15 to 20%.
Sherry, do I recall during the training, the School of Government training that we had, that 50% was the recommendation given to towns our size? Does that sound right?
There's no hard and fast recommendation. There are several documents from the LGC. There's this thing about a statutory 8% minimum. That's not a thing. There's a LGC recommendation that all municipalities maintain at least 8%, but that's not a statutory requirement. 8% would not be sufficient for a town the size of Woodfin. There's not a hard and fast recommendation. They tell you to look at your peers and your operations and develop a policy, and then they offer to review that policy if you think it's necessary.
That number stuck in my head from that training, so.
And looking at Woodfin's specific fund balance, you take a snapshot at the end of the last reporting year. So our last fiscal year ended on June 30th, 2022. At that time, the fund balance was $6,448,000. We had a restricted fund balance, which those are things that are allotted for a specific purpose. We had Powell bill money still in the bank that we had not spent. Unauthorized substance tax money is dedicated specifically for law enforcement purposes of $11,180. We had some unspent bond proceeds those have to be spent on specific things that the debt was issued for of $325,000. And then state stabilization by statute. And that's a formula that state statute gives, and it takes your cash and receivables and liabilities, and it's calculated that way. The auditors calculated that amount at the end of last fiscal year to be $1.5 million. So that totals up to the $2.2 million that was restricted fund balance. We're not supposed to spend that on things other than the things they're allotted for. Which gave unrestricted fund balance of $4,176,000. I made that blue because you'll see that again on the next slide. Our 2022 expenditures were a little over $4 million. Now you'll recall we transferred all of our salary and overtime and FICA tax money to the special revenue fund. So that expenditure level is low, artificially low, because of the ARPA thing we did. And if you calculate your fund balance percentage based on that number, you get 102%. Everybody's like, wow, we need to spend some money. The real number was 69.8% if you add back in the salary and tax money that we moved to another fund. Yes, sir.
2 questions, please. Could you expand just a little bit on third green bullet, unexpended bond proceeds? Why wouldn't you include known debt service in restricted portion?
Debt service, you're required to budget your current portion of debt service, but for unrestricted fund balance, it's not a requirement to just bonds. And
That's interesting.
It's
Okay. What
yeah.
was number that third?
That 325 was what we had left out of the first general obligation bond issuance, the $3 million worth of bonds. We had spent on the parks, all of it but that amount at the end of last fiscal year.
That means it can't be touched for anything except the park.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
got it.
we have since spent that money, and so you won't see it on next year's. And we issued another $1.5 million this fall, the last allotment of the general obligation bonds. And I anticipate having spent most of that by the end of this fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
It's helpful.
Any other questions? Okay. You see this slide most months in your monthly report, but it shows historically what our fund balance has been, the unrestricted portion, and then the percentage is of the expenditures for that fiscal year. So our fund balance over the last 5 years has gone from 58, 59, 55, 76. That 102 was technically the number. It was really 69. And then this year, I anticipate about 56.47%. The number's a little low because our expenditure level was higher, and you have to calculate that based on all the expenditures that we budgeted. So I think we'll probably end up netting everything out with a little bit higher percentage, but we're at a very what this slide shows you is that we're at a very healthy place for a town the size of Woodfin and the amount of cash that we've been able to maintain at the bank. This is the fun one. So calculating fund balance moving forward, as I mentioned, because of the things that are restricted, is a little bit trickier. So you'll recognize the last numbers as we go from 2023, 24, 25. In red where it says revenue over or under expenditures, that will match the numbers at the end of your projection spreadsheet, that summary. So that's what we have, what we'll have left after collecting all our anticipated revenues and subtracting any expenditures we think we will have for the board to work with moving forward. Yes, sir.
Could you go back 2 slides real quick? Quickly. So without the ARPA effect, we did have the ARPA effect, so why would you even look at a number without it? We have it, it's there. It's
So
never
because
gonna-
we paid
it's not going
employee
away.
salaries and
Right.
wages, we used ARPA money under you could take up to $10 million.
But the
and-
budget, the money that was budgeted for that simply goes to unrestricted fund balance. It
Correct.
moved there.
It moved there. Had we not had the ARPA money, our percentage would have been 69%. I just wanted to show you that
So
level.
it's just an okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Got it. That was bugging me.
Yeah,
I'm a little slow compared to my peers.
no problem. Not at all. And anytime you have questions, I'm happy to go over that in detail and show you where the numbers
Right.
came from. So the bottom numbers in blue should tie to the revenue over expenditure numbers at the bottom of your financial forecast summary, that slide with all the blue. Ending fund balance can be projected using that number. So we take the fund balance from the end of 2022, that's $6,448,000, and we subtract from it for the end of this fiscal year the anticipated $217,000 deficit. Because remember, we budgeted $1.5 million that we're not going to spend all that, but only $217,000. So that gives you an ending fund balance at the end of 2023 of around $6,231,000. I'm anticipating estimated restricted fund balance, so those things that we need to hold money aside for specific purposes, of $1.7 million. So that'll leave us the $4,465,000 as unrestricted fund balance. So our percentage at the end of this year is the 56.47%. You can do that same math for each year, 24 through 28 moving forward, and the bottom number shows you what we have left to work with as far as new projects and things like that. The next slide shows you the biggest thing we have on the horizon, in addition to our capital projects that are currently underway, is the town hall project. I attempted, none of this, don't hold me to any of these numbers, but none of this is really at a place where we can evaluate the actual cost, but we think that project is going to cost around $8 million. And we came up with that number because at $300 a square foot for commercial construction, and
It's not finished, furnished, I'm sorry.
Doesn't even exist.
yeah. This is just for sort of illustration purposes, but maybe not furnace, you're
I just
right.
feel like it's wrong.
25,000 square feet, so take 25,000 times the $300 a foot cost, and that gives you the $7.5 million, and then another $500,000 for architectural and permitting fees. That's where we came up with the $8 million. Theoretically, we're saying the town can pay as we go for the first $1.5 million, using some of that fund balance that we've talked about, and then we will have to float debt at $6.5 million to complete the project. Over 20 years, our bond consultant, I called and had a conversation with her last week, and she said that in late 2025, a good number would be about 5% for municipal debt of this type. Use 20 years straight amortization, so that's what I figured into this projection. So if you take the fund balance projections at the top that we talked about on the last slide, and you add in debt service for a new town hall project, our unrestricted fund balance percentage for 2024 at the end of the fiscal year would go down to 47.92%, 52% the next year, 68% the following year, and on up. This shows the debt service, and then the pay-as-you-go, the $750 next year and $750 the following year, we would pay ourselves. Not saying this is how it will pan out, but it'll be something sort of similar to this. It's a big nut to crack, and we want to start thinking about our debt capacity, and as we evaluate other projects and things we spend money on, make sure that we're aware that this big project is sort of lurking in the wings, and we want to be prepared to fund that as the best way possible. So that's why I thought it was important to kind of put those projections in front of you today so that you can think about where we are with that project.
Sure, you think that can be done without a tax increase?
This projection does not forecast a tax increase. That left taxes at 33%.
But what happens with our fund balance when we have two trash trucks blow up like we did last year?
We got brand-new trash trucks, so we're going to cross our fingers and hope that doesn't happen.
I'm just saying.
At least for the next 5 years when we get them paid
understand
for,
that,
and then
and I
we'll
hope
just have to
that's true.
finance some more,
But
yeah.
you can't count your chickens before they're hatched.
No, that's what we have that contingency fund balance for.
Right.
Those were about
When it drops down to
$240,000 a piece.
48%, that makes me worried.
Yeah.
I've got the opposite inclination. I think being more aggressive in terms of how much we would put in up front. If our goal is 50%, we think we're going to get anywhere near that for just 1 year by spending what we're spending up front. Would make sense to me to continue spending more up front to keep us nearer to that 50 number, rather than do something that would get us up to 81.5% within the next 4 years. I mean,
Now, another thing to consider, this is one expansion item. There are a number of sort of priority expansion items. We have more work to do with streets. We have about $260,000 left in the street capital project fund. And if you add the, around 258,000 we got in Powell bill, so you'll have about 5 to spend on streets next year. It's likely we're going to have a greater need than that as we move forward. So that's one thing. We have our park project that will require some expansion of staff and possibly operating costs. None of that is factored in. And then things like Ronnie said, other capital needs, like the next meeting in April, we'll talk about a capital improvement plan, and we'll go over everything we're aware of and when we think we're going to have to replace cars and trash trucks and things like that, and when those costs will need to be added to this forecast. They are not in it now. This is just your base budget. So some of that 60, 70, 80% will be taken up with those items, especially when we start adding additional staff for the park. Any other questions about this?
You're right, it's good to look at that.
Yeah, there will
Gets us
likely,
prepared.
this was our best guess at this point. You know, it's really early. We don't even know where the advisors are going to say town hall should be. We may have if we build a large facility and combine the community center and town hall into a municipal complex, we may spin off either this property or the other one. which would provide some additional resources to help with upfitting and equipment and furniture and stuff and additional fund balance. So we'll have to revise this plan as we go, but this is, I think, a fair starting point.
Just out of curiosity, how many square feet is this building?
11,
Yes,
Chief, how many square feet is this building? Is it 11 or 7?
It's small, it's like,
I have a floor plan on my computer, I'll look it up.
okay, I was just curious as
Yeah.
to, is it small?
I don't think it's 13.
I think it's 11 too, but I'll look it up for you. Okay, and then the last thing that I wanted to talk about with the board today is our debt service. As I promised, I'd give you an update on all the issuances that we have on the table today. Taylor Street, the Public Works facility is nearly paid off. That will, we pay that monthly, and it will go away in early 2026. So we've got another couple years for that building. We paid off the financing that we used to purchase the Silverline building, the doggy daycare facility last year, so that's off the table. We have the first issuance of the general obligation bonds is that third issuance, and we are in the third year of that, and you can see what our debt service is. It was a 15-year obligation. We purchased some street service trucks a year and a half ago, and so we owe $89,000 on those right now. The debt service is $23,000 a year. The new sanitation trucks, the 2 large trucks that we purchased last March, our debt service is $89,000 a year. We'll make our first payment on that in later this fiscal year. That's a 5-year obligation, so in 5 years that'll go away. And the $2.3 million installment loan that it was 2.354, I think was the exact number, for the street improvement project, we pay interest this year, and our first debt service payment will be next fiscal year on that one. The blue line across is this year's payments. And then our final issuance that we currently have on the books is the $1.5 million general obligation bond that we issued in November. And we'll pay interest in May, and the first debt service payment will be next fiscal year. Those are annual payments. Yes, Commissioner.
To make sure everybody's on the same page, would you explain to us the town's obligation regarding Reynolds Village, how that worked, and how that impacts us now and in the future?
Yeah, that's not on here because it's not traditional debt service. This is a debt service we issued, but we entered into it's called tax increment financing, and the developer, the town, and the county came together and made an agreement to put in the streets and stormwater and infrastructure, financing that cost with a bond issuance, and agreed to pay for the debt service, and it's now through 2037 is when that debt is paid for. And the county pays a portion, and we pay, this year, I think it was 43 to 37%. Or no, that doesn't add up, but it's like a 30-40 split. The county pays a little bit more than we do each year. We use tax revenue, so this was actually the first year we didn't have to come up with additional general fund money. So any tax revenue collected on property developed in that improvement zone goes back to the county to pay for debt service, and it amounts to about, I think it was $314,000 this year. I have to look back in the budget, but I believe that's the number.
Does the management of those properties keep the county and/or Woodfin updated on where things are going there in terms of their projections? Because they've
They
gone into
did
a heavy.
initially when they were negotiating this deal, but there were no requirements for that moving forward
They're
that I'm aware of.
they're suddenly in a heavy vacancy situation there. So I was just curious.
Yeah, but
On the retail side, sorry.
It shouldn't affect what we collect because the property taxes are what they are, so, the vacancy shouldn't hurt us.
Because that's the owner's responsibility of the property. Got it. Okay. Thank you. That helps.
Yeah. So this slide illustrates our current debt and what the payments are each year. And then I did a slide adding it, folding in the projected numbers that we talked about a moment ago regarding the town hall project. And so if you add that in, the final column shows what our debt service would be in 2024, 2025, moving forward, if we continue with that project at the level we're estimating. So just to kind of give you some ideas about debt capacity and all that. When municipalities issue debt, it's not only up to the board. If that happens, we have to, it's a fairly cumbersome process that we go through with the state local government commission. So we submit, we have to do an RFP, we hire a consultant, we meet with the LGC and tell them what our plans are and how we plan to pay for it. And we send them copies of our audits and they look at our current books and basically that process is intended to make sure that towns don't overextend themselves, so that if you want to build an $8 million town hall, that you can afford to do so. So they have to approve any debt that we issue for anything other than vehicle purchases. Vehicles and voting machines per state statute don't have to be reviewed by them, but any other debt that we issue does. So that's all I had in the way of forecasts and finances, and hopefully that's given you guys an idea of where we stand financially, and this information will be helpful as we go through some of the meetings after today and making the decisions that you'll be asked to make.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's a lot.
Thank you, Sherry. So I'm going to kind of bring us home with this last discussion item, which is the town's new community grant program. So just to kind of recap, towns are permitted through the state of North Carolina permits municipalities to partner with other service providers to provide needed or valuable services to your community. There are some rules about it, though. The service has to be something that the state authorizes us to perform. So there are some examples that I've listed here: community assistance, parks and recreation, economic developments. These are all things that the state has specifically said it is appropriate and acceptable for towns or cities to work with others on funding things related to these goals. It also has to be something that benefits the public at large and serves a public purpose. So it can't be something that benefits an individual or an individual organization. It's meant to be something that benefits the community. It's public money, it's taxpayer dollars, it's meant to benefit those taxpayers. So back in 2023, we started a conversation about these partnerships, and we identified that Woodfin does primarily two kinds of partnerships. We offer money. We actually issue grant money to organizations to help fund some of these services that we've talked about. We also do in-kind contributions, and a couple that we identified were helping and supporting Woodfin Elementary with the traffic control for their annual 5K event and celebration. And then also the monthly community food bank that we partner with MANA and Catholic Charities. So in these instances, we're not issuing money. We are simply providing support, which has a value. It has a monetary value, so you can look at it that way, but we just generally refer to it as in-kind support. And then monetary, we had committed to Buncombe County last year as well as the year before to contribute to the homeowners grant program. This is funds that people could apply to the county for, and if you were in Woodfin, Woodfin would remit money to Buncombe County to cover those costs, primarily to assist with housing. So it's going to be I think, and I believe if I understand the homeowners grant program, it's focused primarily on homeowners, so things like assisting with property tax. I think when this started, it was a revaluation year, and a lot of people were caught unprepared to pay their property taxes, and I think that's where this grant program came from. We also recognized that the town was holding some money. We had a balance of a little over $51,000 in the beginning of fiscal year '23, and we all recognized that this was money that had been donated to the town over time, over multiple years. The balance built up somewhat during the COVID years. And it was donated from residents and businesses to serve our residents who were most in need, and that was done through a variety of ways. So this was a community grant program that the town was administering. It was just a little less formal than what we gravitated towards at the end of last year, and it's kind of just a program that's evolved. So we initiated that community partner program. There was a desire to kind of be more transparent and open with the money and how the money would be spent. So we developed this program last fall. We brought it before you all. In addition to the $51,000 that was being held, we did allocate money in excess of that. So that is money that sort of came out of our fund balance or out of additional revenues that came in through sales tax, et cetera, offset some of that. And we also discussed that now that we've developed that program to address the balance that we had in fiscal year '23, we could look at this as part of our budgeting process every year. So it's a way for us to identify what the town's goals and needs are and identify our highest priorities, and then talk about how much money and to whom do we want to allocate funds. So as a reminder, that earlier slide, we had our in-kind and our monetary contributions. So as we amended it in 2023, we added some. In addition to the Buncombe County Homeowners Grant, we allocated $50,000 to ABCCM. We actually split that into 2 fiscal years, so $25,000 this year, $25,000 next year. And the Asheville Buncombe Community Land Trust, we committed to $50,000 for fiscal year '23, and with the goal that they would use that commitment to leverage additional matching funds from Buncombe County. And I'm going to come back and talk about them a little bit more in regards to the resolution that was attached to your packets. We also allocated $6,000 to Catholic Charities. Oh, I neglected to mention that before 2023, the town had also done a monetary grant to the Golden Age Club to provide senior or services for seniors, social services, and that money essentially has been reallocated now to Catholic Charities. And then a very small grant to RiverLink for the River Rats program, which is a special river program, educational program that is offered to our Woodfin Elementary students. So we have meets the goal both of addressing the health of the river or educating children on the health of the river while also providing this education opportunity to our children, the Woodfin Elementary children, which are has been a school that has an identified higher need than a lot of the other schools in the region.
And that's $6,000 for number 4 on the Catholic Charities. Is that the Minute Food Bank?
Yes, that is.
And that's a month?
It's held monthly. It's $6,000 for the year.
Oh, okay.
And then it's held monthly.
Okay.
And that is.
I saw the monthly and then
Yeah.
I wasn't sure.
Sorry if that was
Thank you.
confusing. The $6,000 too is, Manna provides the food.
Right.
This $6,000 is really used for non-food essentials, so things like diapers, laundry soap, toothbrushes, those kinds
I don't have
of
a problem.
sundries.
I was just not sure if that was monthly or yearly.
Yeah, that's for the year. So one other thing that we're looking for with this program is some reporting from our partners. And I think that reporting is going to come in different forms depending on who the partner is, what the services that they provide, and how much money do they receive. So we should start to, at the end of this fiscal year, we should start to get some of that reporting information. And we'll be asking those partners to supply that. And in some cases, it might be a short presentation before the council at one of their regular meetings, and in other cases, it might be a report or a combination of the two. Something I think is important for us to note is we did do the annual solicitation that the town has traditionally done, and the donations are down from previous years. We did not collect nearly as much money this year as we have in previous years. So if we were to fund this program, this might largely come from general fund. Future funding is determined. The future funding should be determined through an open and transparent process that's based on council and community priorities. And these priorities come from the council strategic plan, which you all have recently done some work on during your retreat that we're still in the process of finalizing. And then the town of Woodfin's comprehensive plan. Those are probably the two most direct priority setting documents that we would refer to. But there could be other adopted goals and plans. You could have some adopted plan from Parks and Greenways Advisory Committee or from other bodies that could apply. So if we were to move forward with this program in this year, what we would recommend is an early spring timeline that would post applications or an announcement that we would be receiving applications for funding grants, beginning in the middle of this month, on or before March 15th. We would open that application process. We would send a broadcast out to all of our partners and any other nonprofit in the area that we think could be interested, inviting them to look at our information online and apply if they think it's appropriate. We would have approximately a 30-day time period. It's not a terribly complex application, so people should be able to review it and apply within that time frame. And then we would review those applications and make funding recommendations to council's consideration in early May. So that would give you the opportunity to kind of weigh those applications, look at what the different priorities are, and decide how much or whether or not to fund and how much, to what extent you would like to fund. Yes, sir.
Matt, one observation, since this is really new, announcing it next week that we've got this process and giving it 29 days or 30 days to get the grants in, I wonder if we shouldn't give it a little bit more time to let the word get out and let us do 2 or 3 months of social media advertising, make sure Park and Rec knows to get the word out. To me, that looks a little bit tight, given how new it is and
Yeah.
how it might take people a while to get their arms around it and get their act together.
We can do that. It would have the effect of pushing the recommendations back after the budget gets adopted. So that's the only drawback that I see to doing that. So we would have to kind of figure out a different approach, which I think we can do. Yeah, I mean, I think we can look at a general ballpark number and then figure out how to allocate.
That's
within
true.
that.
I mean, am I alone in that, or?
And we did announce it last year, so I do hope that at least our main community partners are aware of the program now, because we did initiate it last year and kind of announced it. So, but, you know, always having more time to get the word out is a good thing if we can afford to do that, or if it fits with all of our other time constraints.
I would also suggest too that, you know, I think why perhaps the funding decreased was there was never any information shared back to the community on how those funds were spent. And so once people kind of figured that out, so my concern about, again, this timeline is I don't know how much of that data is going to be available, since we only kind of launched
So it sounds like it might be a better approach to really just sort of look at a dollar figure and say the town, based on our budget, the town is comfortable allocating X amount of dollars to the community grant program, and then we'll take more time.
That way it's available
With- yeah.
for, okay, that, I'd be happy with that.
And, you know, and even then, if you still, then you get a super robust and exciting pool of applications, and it exceeds what you had allocated, and, you know, you could always do a budget amendment. I mean, that is always a
And
possibility.
if we don't get as much, it simply stays in the fund, stays in the budget.
Correct.
Okay.
When do we anticipate having the first set of reporting from ABCCM on how they're using theirs?
I believe we're expecting it at the end
We-
of
We had
this
a
quarter.
brief report last.
We had a
month.
very brief
Way
report,
more
but I mean, I
formal.
think we were looking for something much more detailed from
Okay,
them.
we're gonna need to give them guidelines of what we're looking for.
And we did give them some guideline, we had a conversation with them about this kind of information would be really helpful.
For reporting, okay.
Yeah, for reporting, and, but I do think it's worth revisiting with them and
Okay.
having a much more detailed conversation. So I'm happy to reach out to them, and I think we can
Yeah, after
shoot.
spending some time with them, I think you're gonna have to go a little bit,
Yeah, yeah.
very, very plain.
Yeah, we definitely have the dollar numbers. They've spent this much, helped this many families. We do have that data, but in terms of, you know, what was the makeup of the family? Is it
Okay.
this kind of funding, or, you know, what was the nature of the
Okay,
emergency
all right.
assistance? We might have to get them to break that down for us a little bit more.
And you think that first round of reporting will be when?
I think it's reasonable to expect it at the end of this fiscal year, and I think that's a good time to shoot for, because it's the end of the, you know, we initially issued 25,000 of the 50,000 to close out this fiscal year, and then there would be another 25. So it's a good midway point for us to stop and pause and evaluate how effective the program has
I
been.
agree. You might even wanna try to develop some kind of a template.
Yeah, and then it gives us a little time to work with them
Perfect.
on the reporting metrics.
Thank
So-
you.
The donations down from previous years, is any of that due to the fact that, like all of the Christmas for Woodfin Elementary was handled outside of this fund? Or is this down from businesses that we reach out to, or both, or what?
It's hard to say. From what I understand, the solicitation has always gone to businesses and places of worship. And that is where the bulk of the contributions has come from. So we sent a very similar solicitation as we have in years past to all of the same businesses and places of worship. So now why their contribution, it's hard to say. It could have something to do with the changes in the Christmas program. It could have to do with just extraordinary inflation and post-pandemic circumstances as well. It's a little hard to say. It could be that they're not in alignment with you know, their goals, those different organizations' goals. You know, it's how the town is spending money. It's very challenging to say for sure. It was disappointing to see that drop. I think something that we haven't done that I think is worth us doing is reaching out to our residents. I don't believe we've ever targeted a solicitation to residential communities, and I think there's a lot of interest and support in those communities to offer some assistance. So I think that might be something we want to do in the coming year.
It was in the newsletters in past years, the fourth quarter.
Oh, was it?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, for residents,
Okay.
yeah,
I-
emergency funds, yeah.
I just don't know that in the same term, we didn't go back and say, hey, we raised this much and spent it on X, Y, and Z.
Right, right.
I think some of it, we had a couple of donors, I'll say, commercial change hands, and I think that's some of it.
Yeah, especially if it's a more substantial donation, that can have a pretty big impact.
I said one in plastics, I'll use them for an example.
Yeah.
They were real nice over the years to the town. They've since sold out.
Just an idea. So I wouldn't support continuing this program if we're the only ones funding it. I don't know if that's a common opinion, but to the extent that we could leverage whatever funds we're going to allocate as, holding them out as funds that we will use to match donations from the community, that might be a way of ensuring that there is continued community support for this. But as a standalone town fund, I mean, it's not really a core municipal function, and so if there's not an income stream coming in from the community that we're needing to deal with and have this fund as a result, I wouldn't be in favor of just maintaining it for the sake of maintaining it. But if we can find a way to leverage those dollars, that would make sense to me.
If there aren't any other questions, I'll just move on to the resolution. You all are aware that we made the commitment to Asheville Buncombe Community Land Trust for $50,000 a year for 4 years, $50,000 in fiscal year '23. They have asked the town to consider a resolution that would commit to $50,000 a year for 4 years for a total of $200,000. That would allow them, again, their goal is to go to approach Buncombe County to get matching funds. And you may recall the presentation from Anna Zueskaya, who is the executive director of ABCLT, that it takes approximately $100,000 subsidy to support one affordable unit. So if the town commits to $200,000 and there's a matching grant from Buncombe County for a total of $400,000, we're looking at 4 affordable units. And one thing that I think makes Asheville Buncombe Community Land Trust a good fit for Woodfin is that they have a number of different programs. They're flexible in how they achieve that affordable housing. There has been expressed interest from council and others in the community that we have some housing stock that's not in particularly good shape, and ABCLT has a program where they can offer assistance to improve those homes, and those individuals can continue to live in the home for the rest of their lives. And they just commit to that when it turns over, it will stay affordable. The Asheville Buncombe community will take it over at that time. So that's one of several ways that they provide affordable housing. And this would be a match. The way the resolution is drafted is we only commit those funds if they're successful in obtaining the match. But they need that commitment in order to approach Buncombe County. So that's the reason for the request now, outside of the normal allocation process.
Do you know if they're making the same request of Weaverville and Black Mountain?
I don't know if they are, but I don't think they are. And I know that, I think they feel that they have a receptive audience here in Woodfin and that we are prioritizing housing. I don't know if they're having those same conversations in the other municipalities.
Well, and it's so hard to figure out exactly what to do about housing, that this, to me, if that nets us 4 affordable houses in the town, that's substantial.
And I don't know if I emphasize this, these are 4 units that would be affordable in perpetuity. So it's a little bit different than some of the affordable housing you see other municipalities, especially the larger municipalities, that they incentivize through development applications. Those are typically time limited, affordable for 15 years, 20 years. But in this case, it would be forever.
Well, along Jim lines, what happens if they don't get the matching funds?
Then we're not on the hook for anything.
Okay.
I was going to say basically the same thing, that this is one of the only tools we have, and so knowing that seems appropriate to continue to use it unless and until we come up with a better alternative.
You know, going back to what Jim said over there a while ago, I think, I'm not opposed to doing this, don't get me wrong, but I think they ought to ask Black Mountain, Weaverville, Biltmore Forest to participate.
I hope they,
And, you know,
I should clarify that this resolution would be for housing only in Woodfin.
Yeah,
So it's not, if they want to do that in those other
That's true.
municipalities.
yeah, but I
they
think
could.
you ought to ask them anyway, request it.
I wouldn't say no.
We can't control what they do, but by allocating this funding from Woodfin, we're ensuring that those houses are going to be
Yeah.
in Woodfin.
on your next routine communication, could you ask if they're
Sure, I'd be
doing
happy
that?
to, and I can
And then
report back.
let us know.
Yep.
That'd be helpful. Thank you. Yeah.
I suspect they would be super excited if this resolution were to pass, and then they would use that
Yeah,
as
yeah, yeah.
leverage to
Push the
approach
others.
those other
That's
municipalities,
what I was
so.
Okay, well, you've heard the information about this, and we've got they just happen to have a sample resolution here.
There is a resolution attached, or was included in your packets.
the last thing in there, but do we have anyone wishes to make a motion that we do this?
I would make the motion that we do this.
Have a second?
Yes, sir, second.
Any discussion?
Don't need to do that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We done our part.
So, and I accidentally exited the slide, but it's Resolution 2023-06, so just for the record.
We don't need to read it into the record?
No, that's
Okay,
it.
is it a packet?
Yes, I was looking for the motion. Ellen, you-
All right, well, thank you very much. I think this is really helpful feedback, and now we have some parameters to look at for the community grants programs.
Did we have anything else to come before us this afternoon? Have a motion, we adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.
Chapter.
Like,